Hey, I want to welcome everybody to the session today. My name is Suzanne Abdelrahim. I am one of the researchers on this project with UC Davis, and really happy to be here with you all and excited for you all to join us. I'll let my colleagues introduce themselves as well before we start.
Hi, I'm Leslie Baines, and thanks to you all for being here. I'm excited to see what we can all do together.
Hi, everyone. I'm Soha Mahmoud-Tabana, and I will be helping facilitate today's session as well. And again, looking forward to hearing everything that we have to talk about today.
And so before we get started, I just want to make you aware of the Padlet link. I put that in the chat. If you haven't visited that, we encourage you to have that open. That is a place for you to introduce yourself and to post questions that you have. We're going to encourage some reflection, and we encourage you to use that to record some of your reflections and your thoughts. Any tools or resources for today's session is also on that Padlet. Is Padlet new to anyone in the room? I know that sometimes it's a new tool. Some people haven't used Padlet before, but some of you may be familiar. If you're not familiar with it, it's really easy to use. It's pretty self-intuitive, but please don't hesitate to reach out and ask questions if you're confused, you're not quite sure how to use it. All you have to do is kind of look for that plus sign to add a post.
I've used it before, but I came in after you posted it. So you have to put it in the chat again, or
yes.
Thank you.
Sure. And actually, let me just keep it up here for a second while I... Okay, you should have it now. And so our introductions are on the left-hand side. You can read a little bit more about each of us and everyone in the room today. We've got some questions. I'll refer back to these questions in the communication section in just a little bit. The resources for today, if you are wanting a copy of the presentation slides, they are right here for you. We have them in Canva. I believe it's a PDF version in here for you. So feel free to have that for your reference. We're going to be making mention to some of these other tools as well. So don't worry about everything in that column quite yet. We'll get to that. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them here or ask them aloud. All you have to do is click on that little plus and say what your question is. You just type in your question and then hit enter, and there it is. Or you can delete your post. So it's really easy to use. We use this in classrooms. We use it for professional learning. You can really use this in many different ways. So we're going to be using Padlet today for our learning. Any questions before we get started?
Suzanne, I just also wanted to add to that there's 3 buttons at the top corner at the right-hand side, and it's going to allow you, when we're done with the session, to create a PDF document of this. And so you can have it, you can save it, and then any links that are in here will be clickable within that PDF document.
Thank you, Soha. And if you are signed into Google, and you post a question, let's say, or post a response, it's going to have your name attached to it. But if you're not signed into Google, it's going to show up as anonymous. So if you're wondering why your name's not there, or it is there, that's why.
And actually, it would be helpful if you put in a question just to go ahead and add your name to it, so we know specifically if there's something that we need to get back to you on, we know who to respond to. So that would be a great idea if you could do that as well.
Mm-hmm. Great point. So if you are not signed in and it shows up as anonymous, make sure you put your name on it so we know who to respond to. And we did see, let me just update this. We did see some questions that had come up in the teacher interest form that you filled out. We'll be trying to address some of those questions today. If you still have questions after today, we didn't respond to those, we will make sure to reach out and to get those questions answered. We also had an opportunity to look at your pre-surveys. Those of you who did fill out the pre-surveys, thank you. Very valuable information. We've tried to kind of pull from that as well to inform the session today and our future sessions as well. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Today's session, we're going to be presenting to you our READ framework for bilingual family school partnerships, but our focus for today is really on communication. So there's different parts to the framework. And today is just focusing on communication, because if we focused on everything, it would just be way too much. We only have an hour and a half today. So we're just looking at communication and how well are we communicating with bilingual families. And I know that that was a section, for those of you who did fill out that pre-survey, that was a specific section that we asked some questions about. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. The second session is going to be on relationships. And then the third session is going to be on advocacy, and really looking at all of these pieces with student learning in mind. That's kind of the end goal. All right, so for our agenda today, we are going to spend a little bit of time with introductions, introducing ourselves, and looking at the framework, introducing the framework. So Soha's going to be doing that with you and showing you a video that can be used as a tool for this, for future professional learning as well. Then we're going to spend some time reflecting on current practices around communication, looking at the specific research that we looked at when developing this work, looking at specific tools that are designed around communication, but can also kind of work in some of the other areas as well. So you'll see some overlap. And then application. So how are you going to take the information from today and the learning that happens with our collaboration? We're going to try to make sure that we provide some time for you guys to go into breakout rooms and to talk with one another and share some ideas. What is it that you're doing? What are things that you'd like to do? And really apply that learning in future work. So that's our agenda for today. Does anyone have questions about the focus for today or anything else? Don't be shy. Okay. All right, we're going to start with our READ framework for bilingual family school partnerships. We're going to, Soha's going to actually walk you through the framework that we've developed here.
All right, we're actually going to start with a bit of a video, and then we're going to talk about the components that are in here. This is a link that we had shared with you earlier. I'm not sure if everyone got to look at it or not. So we'll start with the video and then we'll go ahead and talk about it. So Suzanne, if you wouldn't mind starting that for us.
Sure. And I just want to show everyone where I'm getting this video. So we've developed this video and we've actually put it on the Padlet for you. So, you know, if you, I don't know, a week later from today, or you say, oh, I want to watch that video again, I want to kind of better understand the pieces of the framework, you have it here on the Padlet. So it's the second tool right here, introduction video. So I'm going to go ahead and play this for you all, and then Soha's going to talk to you guys about it.
Welcome to the READ framework for bilingual family school partnerships. This framework consists of 3 key components: communication, advocacy, and relationships that serve to foster student learning. We situate our framework within 2 theories of family engagement: Epstein's theory of overlapping spheres of influence and Yasso's community cultural wealth model. When schools connect home languages to language and learning at school, the result is increased student achievement. Our dynamic approach promotes reciprocal communication, empowers advocacy efforts and trusting relationships, focuses on student learning, and values students' linguistic and cultural backgrounds. There are 3 key components: communication, advocacy, and relationships, working together with the ultimate goal of engagement in student learning. Our framework also incorporates TransLanguaging practices, which recognizes that emergent bilinguals can use their home language to help draw from all of their linguistic resources, promoting a deeper understanding of content. We think of communication as sharing and exchanging information using culturally sensitive TransLanguaging practices. Advocacy is including families as key decision makers in shaping activities and programs to value diverse perspectives. We think about relationship building as building mutual trust between bilingual students, educators, and families. At the center of our framework, we offer a bridge from theory to practice for engaging emergent bilingual families using a TransLanguaging approach to increase student learning. Research shows that engaging families in the education of their children results in positive academic outcomes for students in general and for bilingual students in particular. Our team here at Reed set out to design a framework and corresponding resources to support educators and administrators in fostering and fortifying family engagement efforts, with a specific focus on families of emergent bilingual students. And just taking a look at the graphic that we have here, you'll see that, again, that video really just does a nice job of giving you the background of where we were when we were building this framework and the reasoning behind why we chose to do it this way. So really thinking of that circular process of communication, advocacy, and relationship building, and those being key features in keeping our parents involved and our families involved, because again, our ultimate goal in everything that we're developing is focusing on that student learning. So how do we get everyone involved? The other thing to keep in mind is taking a moment to talk about just some specific terms that we're going to be talking about when we're talking about this framework. So we purposely use the term family because we want to be inclusive of the full range of household types and family structures to which students belong. So we want to include those people with traditional parental families, extended family members, any additional or alternative caregivers. We know that our students are coming from various backgrounds, so we want to make sure that we are incorporating all of those by using the term families in that sense. And then we also use the term engagement to signify the active involvement that really balances out the power and opportunity between educators and caregivers. So again, family, that's our parents, extended family members, and additional or alternative caregivers. When we're talking about engagement, that's that active engagement where we're balancing out that opportunity between our educators and our caregivers. So really bringing that link together. Suzanne, can you go on to the next slide for us? And so one of the things that we really also want to focus on is building that positive goal-oriented relationship with our families. And in order to build those relationships, we really want to make sure that it's mutually respectful, that it includes genuine efforts to understand families' beliefs and values and priorities. And we want to sustain families' cultures in all languages. So we're really focusing on making sure that we're incorporating their home languages while we're doing these activities as well. And we're going to delve in a lot deeper to that as we start talking later on today.
Any questions so far or any thoughts about the framework? Thank you, Soha. All right, let's start off our work by, I'd like us to spend some time reflecting on our current practice. So specifically around communication with bilingual families. So we have some questions on the slide that we would like you to just spend a few moments thinking about, and then we want to open it up for discussion here. And we were able to kind of get a little bit of a sense of what's happening at your school sites from the survey questions, your answers from the survey questions. So, but we'd like a little bit more. So we invite you to reflect on these particular questions. How well are we communicating with bilingual families, and how do you know that? What modes of communication do our bilingual families prefer? Are there other modes that we could be using? And which communication strategies work best for our bilingual families? And how can we better evaluate this? So we'd like to let's spend about 3 to 4 minutes to kind of reflect on these, and then we'll open it up for conversation. All right, let us hear from you. Let's start with the first one here. How well do you think you all are communicating with bilingual families, and how do you know? What are some of your thoughts?
I can go first. I'll be the lone sheep. I don't feel like I'm great at it. This year we're using Seesaw, which has an embedded translation feature, so that's been helpful. My parents, when they signed up for Seesaw, could put the language that they wanted, and it will translate for them. So that's been my helper this year.
Thank you, Christy.
I was going to say something similar to Christy. We use Class Dojo, which also has that embedded translation feature. We use it school-wide, so all messages that come about anything from the school are sent on that. And so I have a family that I have two families that always do it in translate into Russian, and then two that do into Chinese, and then one in I have an Indian family. We don't have a heavy Hispanic population at our site, but I know that it's got many. And I've also had a parent-teacher conference via Zoom early on before we got to go back in person. And our district uses Language Link, so that was phoned in, and it was a little difficult, but it was better. It was better than not having an interpreter there in person. But that's what they're using. So our principal was on with me, and she phoned into the Language Link, and then we would talk and she would translate, and then we'd translate back. So it was Zoom and phone. It was like, okay, but at least it was better than nothing. So I don't know. I still think that, I'm still looking for better communication, ways to communicate better. So.
Thank you, Bev. I did not know that about Dojo. I just learned that Flipgrid has it. That's what Leslie told us. Flipgrid will translate as well, which I think is really neat.
I feel like this year is a little unique for me because I only started off with 2 EL students, and both of those didn't need translation, and then one of them moved away. So now I only have 1 EL who's, like I said, dad can speak English, so it's not really an issue this year, but I have had years where I feel like communication could be better. So I feel like this will, help me with some strategies and ways in which, but right now I'm not really having to communicate with bilingual families. So it's a little different this year for me, but.
Thank you, Megan. Anybody else?
I think for me, I've primarily had Hispanic families, and I am able to communicate in Spanish on my own, at least at some basic level with the families. So just having that as my own experience, it's been okay. Our whole school and district also sends everything in Spanish, as well as English. Everything's all translated. We've got translators for report cards or for IEPs available, but again, it's just Spanish. So I feel like we're doing an okay job at the Spanish level, but any other language is kind of forgotten about, or there's just not a big enough population to that we don't have a staff on hand that is able to provide that immediate resource. So I know last year I had kiddos that spoke Creole, and I don't know any Creole, and no one on campus knew it at all. So my little phone with Google Translate was great, and I'd type something in and tell it, have it play for the dad, and we'd try and work that way, but it was not ideal by any means. But for Spanish, we've got staff at each site that can help and support. And we do have a district-wide translator as well.
Thank you, Laura. Anybody else?
I can, at my site, it's very similar to Laura. I feel like Spanish and Russian is good. We have both of those interpreters on site. Our Russian interpreter just retired, but we do have one available for us. However, our Russian, I feel like our Russian population is dwindling, and we're starting to get more families that speak Pashto and Urdu and Punjabi. And we only have one person at the district level that can translate those languages. And it's been really tricky, especially as a lot of newcomers this year through technology, where we're trying to teach them technology plus the language. It has been really tricky. So yes, I feel in some areas, Spanish, Russian, we do really well district-wide and site-wide. But as more of newer, not new languages, but in bigger populations at our school site, we need to get better at translating for those families as well.
Thanks, Erica. And I remember reading your response, and I actually jotted it down because I was going to talk to you more about that. Very interesting. You know, in the state of California, we have, a lot of times we think Spanish, right? You know, Spanish is the most common, but we do have so many other languages that we may not be as familiar with, but are, you know, we've got to provide some support for those families as well.
Right. I think when I looked in to see how many English language learners we have on site, I looked at one class particularly, and there was 11 different languages. So yeah.
How neat. Such an asset to the class. But I know it can be challenging though for the teacher.
I'm just going to agree with everything that Erica just said. I think right now I have like 5 different languages: Spanish, Punjabi, Farsi, Russian. And it is I feel like I could do a better job communicating with the parents. And I think fortunately, they're very understanding that I'm trying my best. And we have a great translator, but that takes time. So when the parents have a question right in the moment on Zoom or or the class dojo, it's just challenging. And so I would love other strategies to make them feel more comfortable. And I know they're trying to help as best they can. So that's my experience so far.
Thanks, Teresa. And on that note, kind of what you're saying there, do you have an idea of maybe, you know, our next question here, what modes of communication do the bilingual families prefer? Are you noticing?
Some of my families are better at my class dojo. For me, I think at least maybe one family member or person in the household can help translate. And they also, I think my my experience is that our secretaries are great. So sometimes if I'm in the middle of Zoom and they know that I don't have the time, they know that they can call the office if they're virtual. They can call the office, and our office staff is super awesome at helping. I know they don't do what my families do not do well with email. So it's either a cell phone via the dojo or I use Google Classroom. So that's what I've seen. But I personally haven't asked them like their preference, which I think that's a great idea for me moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Great point. Yeah, and that could be something that you could start the year off with next year, right? Or even as we kind of wrap up this year, if they have a preference of what mode of communication they prefer. And I guess I'm also thinking about, we've been in this COVID situation for so long, but before COVID, how do you feel your bilingual families responded to in-person communication as well? Go ahead, Erica.
I feel like, great, because I haven't like studied or done data on this, but I feel like more families that are bilingual want to talk with the person like face to face, or they like coming to meetings with the translator present. So I know that hasn't happened as much during COVID time, and now that we're back in person part of the day, I do see more of them coming and trying to speak with people on campus. So
Thank you.
versus email or technology, because lots of times they might not have the technology at home. Not to say that language correlation, but sometimes it's just more difficult through technology pieces than just in person.
Thank you. Has that been the experience for anyone else here?
I would agree with that. I think that most of my bilingual families, no matter what language they speak, it's much easier to do face-to-face, not with masks, but the past year. But in general, throughout my career, it has been my experience that, face-to-face, you can get those general expressions and you can really convey better. It's a lot of body language. And so that in person is really, really helpful. And I think that's been a detriment in the last year that we have not had that.
Also, if I could piggyback on what Paula was saying, a lot of the translation, which is better than nothing, but a lot of the translations, can you hear me? I don't know. I'm wearing these janky earphones. Yes. I'm not sure if they're the best. But a lot of translations like Google Translate, and we use Blackboard, which I think actually does a really decent job translating messages. Some of the language, the direct translation, does not convey the message that you want to be conveyed, and the nuances of what you're wanting families to understand or have questions about do not fall through. And so relying on just that as your way of communication, I think leaves a lot of families in the air. Like, I don't understand. Like when we talk about our, for example, seesaw, sometimes it literally translates it as balancín, which is literal seesaw, but that's not what we mean. We mean the program seesaw. So, I could understand how we're using what we have, but if you don't have that language, you're not able to look at it. You're going, whoa, that makes no sense. And especially if it doesn't correlate with our bilingual families or any kind of families, their educational level, the linguistical part of it does not match up. Sometimes it's a very super like university high level translations, and that's not going to cut it for some of our families. So that's another thing so I agree with Paula, and I forgot who spoke before Paula. The face-to-face is definitely culturally, I'm speaking from Hispanic culture, Latinx culture, culturally face-to-face is definitely the best.
Mm-hmm.
Has anybody used the Skype translator? Because I know Skype is another platform that we can use to communicate. I use it to just communicate with friends, in other countries, but I'm wondering if anyone has ever used Skype to communicate with their families.
I have used Skype to communicate with families, but I was not aware of the translation piece to it. So thank you, Teresa.
I agree with Gladys and Paul. I feel like the in-person for me makes me feel like I can have a better connection with them. I feel that as someone that doesn't speak a lot of Spanish or whatever, multiple languages, I don't get to build that same relationship with those families that I do with English-speaking families, just because I can't have that extra small talk and ask them about their weekend or those kind of things before a meeting or when I see them. But when I feel like when we're face-to-face, at least when there's a translator, they feel we can build that trust together. They don't just see me as a screen and someone else saying the words for me. They can see my smile. They can see like my reaction to what they're saying. I just feel like it helps at least a little bit, just create more of a trusting relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, some of the points that have come up, especially, providing bilingual families with access to some of this technology, right? And are we providing training to make use of technology tools for communication? It's great that we have all these technology tools that can translate and do all this, but if the families haven't been trained in how to use it or even how to make sense of some of these technology tools, then it's not really effective. So, that's something I think that we can all spend some time thinking more about. What kinds of opportunities are we providing our bilingual families with in terms of access to, devices and training? And I know Soha's going to talk about that digital equity piece a little bit later. But, another thing that I think came up, another theme would be really being knowledgeable about bilingual families' cultures and traditions, life experiences. And a lot of us have that, especially if we share that language or that culture with those families. Sometimes we don't. Sometimes there's new languages and populations at our schools that we know nothing about. So it's really taking that time to become more knowledgeable about these families, cultures, and traditions, and knowing that just because you Google it, right, or you watched a video on it, that is not representative of that entire group. It may give us some information, but it's tricky because we don't know, what formal schooling have these students come to school with. What do they do in their home countries? What experience do they have with schooling, with technology? There's just, so many pieces of information and knowledge that we need to really know about our families. And that ties into the relationship piece, which we'll talk about next time as well. But, something to think about, and something we encourage you to think about too, as you also regularly evaluate the effectiveness of your communication practices. So what communication practices are you using? And then taking the time to really think about and evaluate, are they effective? If they're not effective, what can we do to change that? And so hopefully after today's session, you'll have some more ideas about that. Let's move forward. Is there anyone else who had any other thoughts or ahas or sharing that they wanted to do before we move forward?
I came in a little late. I, for some reason, thought I was going to start at 4:30. But I don't know if it has been mentioned. For me, I'm a bilingual teacher. More than half of my population is with bilingual families. And so it's been a kind of a shocking experience, how different this year has been, I think, for everybody. But in my case, at my school, we get to choose whatever preferred app, whether it be ClassDojo or Bloom's, to communicate with families. And this year I resorted to ClassDojo, but like all other years, it's always been the bilingual families that don't register, whether it's because they don't know how, even though, when we do have a back to school night, whether virtually or in person in the past, we've offered help. Like, I'll show you step by step, don't worry, like I'll get it on your phone. But this year, and I had never done this before, I gave out like my personal number. I wanted to do a Google number, but never got around to it. And I have all of my bilingual families on my phone. I was afraid of, that borderline of them calling me X times after hours, whatnot. But thankfully that hasn't happened. Like, they've been really amazing at keeping, school hours and only contacting me then. And it's worked beautifully. I've never had such close relationships with my bilingual families as I have this year. I think like this year they've been the most informed because of that. Text messages or direct phone calls. And I think it's taking it back to what is available to them, right? Whether it's technology, devices, most of them don't have a computer. They all have a phone, but most of them don't use apps other than the apps that come with a phone. So I think reflecting upon that, I think it's been very successful for me this year with my bilingual families, keeping it like that personal. Granted, it wouldn't work for everybody, but that's something that I was really happy about this year.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing. All right. Let's move on to, want to share a little bit of the research that we engaged in. One of the research studies that we looked at was a meta-analysis of the efficacy of different types of parental involvement programs for urban students. And this was from the work of William James, I never know if I'm saying the name right, but James identified 4 kinds of family engagement that most positively influence student outcomes. And those are family reading programs, daily homework checking programs, collaborative programs in which teachers and families work as partners to improve student outcomes, and programs that foster increased communication among educators and caregivers. And so when we talk about communication, we're referring to the regular sharing and exchanging of information regularly between bilingual students, educators, and families using culturally sensitive and translanguaging practices. Now, if you haven't heard the term translanguaging before, we're going to get to that. And I know Leslie's very passionate about that, and she'll have some things to add. But, you know, that's looking at that yellow section here on this slide. That's a lot, but I want you to just take a moment to kind of digest that and think about that. So exchanging of information regularly and thinking about that culturally sensitive and translanguaging piece. So we're going to get into that in just a little bit here. Now, Epstein's work is really relevant to our research. You saw that in the introductory video. We actually use Epstein Theory. We use that to kind of ground and frame our work. For teachers, so Epstein's work, you know, talks about the purposes for communicating. So for teachers, regular communication increases their ability to understand family views on student learning. For families, the purpose for communicating with the school improves their understanding of educational programs and policies and helps them monitor their child's progress. And then for students, because it's not just with the teachers and the families, right? It's for students as well. Communication with teachers and their caregivers increase awareness of their own progress and the steps they need to take to improve academic achievement. And so you probably all know that districts legally have to provide translated school information and materials for families that they serve. Actually, one of the school districts in my area got in a lot of trouble for that because they did not do that. So, you know, this is something that is legally mandated. As I mentioned before, digital equity is really important. And I know Soha's going to talk to us a little bit about that. Soha? Oh, you're muted.
Thank you. So when we're thinking about digital equity, it's interesting to hear everybody's feedback about how technology is probably one of the ways that you're having a problem communicating with your parents, and it sounds like face-to-face is what you're finding to be more successful. And so as we look at digital equity, we really want to think about engaging caregivers and families in every stage of the process, working to develop caregivers' familiarity with the platforms that we're using. I found it really interesting when you were talking about even when you're giving them those specific instructions, that you're finding your bilingual families sometimes aren't the ones that are going onto those platforms. So it sounds like finding different ways to increase their confidence in using those programs alongside of their children. And sometimes our children can be the greatest resource in helping their families with those different things as well. So that's definitely something to keep in mind as you're teaching families, teaching those children as well, so that they can relay the message if needed. And then we think about digital outreach that can help our caregivers stay informed and become more involved and be better positioned to help with kids' schoolwork and all factors driving better student engagement. And actually, one of the concerns that we were talking about as a group as we were developing this framework was something that someone else had mentioned today as well. You know, the reliability of some of these resources in being translated. If you speak a different language and you can read some of the things that are being translated, you say, you know, I wonder if that is, it's not necessarily always correct or accurate. But we want to think about, when we're thinking about equity, really teaching our families, giving them those equal opportunities to have that the digital access and the technology that they have, because again, that's such a big tool. And as a lot of you were saying, some families don't have that available. So one of the key points that we're talking about is access to those digital technologies. And I know in the school district where I live, that's one of the advantages that have happened with COVID, is the simple fact that every student in our district now has a device, which would not have happened highly unlikely that it would have happened if COVID didn't hit. So that was one of those things that I think they're going to keep in the school system and in the school districts. That will definitely be an advantage because now families will have access to that technology and the software, and those schools are providing all those apps and softwares right there. So that's one of those things that as districts and schools, we want to really think about giving that access to the technology so that we can help open those lines up of communication between school and home. And really doing that family-friendly training and asking parents to come in and making sure that they know how to use the equipment and how can they check their students' progress online so that everybody is clear. So even if there's a language barrier, they can still go in and access the things that are important to them, even if sometimes the conversational pieces may not be there. And then having technology nights. So maybe student-led tech talks, increasing those confidence levels and those digital platforms, having different presentations or going to different stations so that they can go and really get hands-on into the process. So as much as it's hard to get everybody involved, I think the more that they have access to all of this and that it's reiterated over and over again so that it becomes part of the natural progression, because we know if you're not comfortable with technology, it's a process to get used to it. And the first time you go in there, it might feel really uncomfortable, but the more that they are engaged with it and the more that they are taught how to use this, then hopefully families will be more comfortable with that process. Any questions or comments with the digital equity? Okay, Suzanne, could you move to the next slide, please? Thank you. And so thinking about, actually, Suzanne, I'm going to ask you to backtrack one more time. I'm sorry. One of the things that I did want to mention on this part is that we actually have a resource that is in the Padlet. That is a tool that we've created. And one of the things that it's doing is really having you think about what are ways that we can engage families, especially when we're talking about social media. And one of the things that we really thought about was how do we go about getting families involved through social media? So it's really hard sometimes to have those conversational pieces. But what happens if we start to have maybe a Facebook message, or we have an Instagram page, or we have something where our families are going in there and we're actively going in, we're choosing the platform that we want, we're explaining the pros and cons of each one, or taking into consideration pros and cons of each one, taking that into consideration, and then crafting a social media plan. So maybe there's a clear purpose, and your purpose could be just engaging your families, giving them tutorials, any kind of feedback, sharing class activities. There's so many ways that we could reach out. And again, coming down to families seeing this in a more frequent time frame. So maybe twice a month where we're going in and posting something, or once a week where we're going in and posting something. So they are feeling connected to the school, even if they're not able to come in because they're working 2 or 3 jobs. So maybe they can pop in and see what's going on, or maybe give them some helpful hints of things that they can do along the way, and setting up some type of a theme for that type of a platform. And we also have another guide that we're going to be sharing as a tool later down the line. And it's going to have some of those posts to go along with it so that you can have samples of that you can use or accommodate for your own schools as well.
So really quick, that's in the resource tools section on the Padlet, and it's called Engaging with Families on Social Media, a beginner's guide for educators. So we have posted that for you if you wanted to take a look at that. All right, Soha, sorry. Next slide.
Yep.
There you go.
So now thinking about cross-cultural communication, we think about understanding that there are different ways of communicating that reflect on one's cultures. So like we were talking about earlier, cultural influences or culture influences the ways that people communicate. So if educators fail to consider communication differences, then families might be reluctant to participate in school functions because they might misinterpret or not understand what's being communicated. And that's a really big component of that piece right there, is making sure that we are being culturally sensitive to the different cultures that we have represented within our schools. The second one, acknowledging, respecting, and accommodating cultural differences in communication styles. So realizing that it's really important that schools acknowledge the views of families' culture, values, and values it as a strength. So we really want to embrace your culture. We want to know more about your culture. So translating those important pieces of communication, that definitely falls along those lines as well. Maybe in your schools, as they're entering their building, there's posters hung up around your building in those languages so that they can see what's going on or have helpful tips around the building for them. Just really seeing that they are being invited in there, and having role models in those different cultures, maybe people who are setting up examples of people who can basically go in and communicate, whether it's other parents communicating and sharing the norms of the school or things to keep in mind or different events that are happening. So one of the other things that we're going to talk about in later meetings or later webinars that we're going to be talking about is going to be how do we use or have parents, other parents that share that same cultural background or language background, help them bring in the cultural differences in that language as well. So using them as a strategy to help build bridges between our families. And then finally, using those strategies that remove barriers to communicate that result from cultural differences. So really promoting those cross-cultural communications by asking parents and family members to maybe come in and talk about what they do within their households. What are some of their cultural norms within their households? Maybe sharing out foods or experiences or holidays so that they feel like their culture is being embraced as well. So not always just about the language, but cultural variances as well, and learning that we're really invested in that so that we can share those views. So really talking about being supportive of an inclusive environment where families have the freedom to use all languages.
So schools and districts have found different ways to support multilingual families using translation and interpretation services to improve communication. And a lot of you have actually already given a lot of examples of that. In your surveys, we've learned that many of you use Google Translate to reach out to families. You have on-site translators, biweekly newsletters, facing some new challenges with some different populations. So we've learned a lot about that from all of you through your surveys and through your sharing today. Some districts really use technology to support their efforts as well in like translated robocalls. I don't know if any of you have experienced that at your district. Multilingual texting apps. I know that Dojo does that, and some of the others that you guys referenced. Video conferencing translation software as well. Live interpretation in meetings with trained professionals. We see that a lot. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Microsoft Translator. Some of you probably are. It's similar to maybe some other things that you've seen, but I'm going to take a minute and show you. It's a really quick video. It's almost kind of, in some ways, it's kind of like a commercial, to be honest with you, or it appears to be more like a commercial, but it's interesting to see how so many languages are supported within one meeting. So we're going to watch how Chinook Middle School, it's a school that has more than 80 different languages spoken. in using Microsoft Translator, which has really allowed faculty and staff to really better engage with their student, parent, and family communities. So really making them a part of the conversation. So not just, okay, we have some information to share with you. We're going to have Google Translate or Microsoft Translate it all and present this information in a meeting. It actually goes beyond that. It really makes these families a part of the conversation. So we're going to take just a moment here, and I want to share this video with all of you.
Click here to view the video and then return back to this presentation.
All right, what do you think about that? Have you used anything? Have you seen this before where it's used within like a whole group meeting like this, where they can actually interact, ask questions, it comes up on the screen and translates live? Does anyone use anything like this? So this is just one example. You can actually, on the Padlet, you can find an entire list of translation and interpretation resources. And so that is actually labeled on here, translation and interpretation resources. That is another tool that we have created with this project. And I encourage you to take a look at that. So there's some divided up in some different sections here: real-time translation, texting software with translation, video conferencing, online translation services. So they're kind of broken up into some different groups for you here. So we encourage you to check out that tool as well on the Padlet. So I know we talked a little bit about, earlier I brought up TransLanguaging. And how I know that Leslie's very passionate about this, but has anyone used this or heard of this term before? Or maybe you use this term, TransLanguaging? You can kind of give me a little thumbs up or a nod, or is this new to most people? Okay, so when we refer to TransLanguaging, TransLanguaging is a practice that helps students and families feel that their home language and culture is valued. So it refers really to a use of a person's entire language repertoire to communicate. It's really the natural language practices of bilingual people. And we can, you know, when teachers use TransLanguaging pedagogy and they're committed to communicating with families, with children, they're going to experience more successful experiences in school. So we can really find ways to help students draw on all their linguistic resources to really learn that academic content. And so, you know, we have some examples here, and this is not necessarily mean that you have included TransLanguaging and this is it, you know, these posters, but this is an example of how we can encourage students to use all of their language repertoires in the classroom. So, you know, we're having these welcome signs or these, you know, this particular poster on autumn in different languages. That's sending a message to those students that we encourage you to use your home language. That it is welcome. It is welcome. You know, we welcome them to use all of their languages to explain how they solve problems. I know that in some of the other work that we're doing with UC Davis around math and fractions and sentence frames, we use sentence frames, right, in our classes, and thinking about how we can maybe provide sentence frames in other languages as well to help support students' academic development. Leslie, did you have other things you wanted to share about TransLanguaging? I know that this could be a session in itself.
I could talk about this all day, but I'm just going to add maybe one little thing to think about. At the beginning, we were hearing a lot about the need to translate for families that don't speak English, right? And that's obviously first priority. How do we communicate with our families when we don't speak their language? But I would encourage this group to broaden that a little bit and also think about bilingual families. Maybe English and another language is spoken in the home and they're perfectly bilingual. How could we also use the home language, the language other than English, and bring that in to help develop really strong, positive bilingual identities in our students by bringing in their home language and by connecting with parents, having parents come in and share important ideas in the home language, in a mix of the home language and English. Lots of different things we could think about there. that goes beyond just who needs to communicate in their home language and maybe who wants to, right? And what can that do for all of us when we bring in those languages?
Thank you, Leslie. Does anyone have any thoughts on that? Something to think about a little further, and as we kind of plan with, for further communicating with our parents and how to more effectively communicate with our parents, translanguaging should really be a part of that, that process. Okay, we are going to spend, let's see how we're doing on time. Oh, I think we're doing okay. We're going to spend about 7 to 10 minutes in some breakout rooms, and we would like you to reflect on some of these questions. And I know when you go to your breakout rooms, you probably will not have this in front of you. So if you want to jot down some notes, you can, or maybe I always take my phone and just take a kind of a quick picture of it. You're going to be grouped with maybe some folks that you do know, maybe folks that you don't know. I don't know if we're going to do a random assignment here, but we'd like you to spend some time reflecting on, do you have a consistent way of communicating with all your family? So I know you've had an opportunity to share a little bit about that, but I want you to think about the consistent piece and how regularly it's happening, and describe that to the other folks in your group. Are you making an effort to communicate to the families in the language that they understand? If so, describe. If not, what could you do? And, you know, I'm going to kind of add on to that as well. You know, that translanguaging piece. How can we think a little bit further about that? And that also goes with this last one. How do you help your bilingual families feel that they are really partnering with you for their child's education? So I know that that last one is more about the advocacy piece, which we're going to spend an entire session on, but I would like you to spend some time reflecting on that with your group. How do you help your bilingual families feel that they are partnering with you for their child's education? So any questions before we go out into breakout rooms? Okay, be prepared when you come back. We are going to ask each group to share. So, and it could be something that you said or something that you heard somebody say, but we will ask if we have a representative from each group that would be ready to share some of the reflections and some of the discussion that occurred in your breakout rooms. Okay, we will see you in, we'll send a little message in about 10 minutes to see if you're ready to come back. Welcome back. I hope that was enough time for everyone. Got to drop in on a couple groups, had some great conversations, heard some wonderful things. Which group would like to go first? Kind of share out what your group talked about.
I guess I can go first. We ended up mostly focusing on the first question, which was just like the way of communicating, because I think for all of us, that's something that we want to make sure we're doing effectively with our students. So we just kind of shared out different ways in which we're doing it. For example, using the Remind app versus using Google Voice, and the fact that the Remind app, which I didn't realize I learned has translation in 6 different languages. I haven't had to use that feature this year, but kind of a cool thing to find out. But also the key importance of making sure that all families have joined whatever platform you're communicating with them on. So it's not going to do any good if I'm sending out important messages and they're not receiving them. And also having just very clear, concise sharing of information. You know, sometimes less is more if you really want to get that information across. Also too, just picking up more on the second question and that effort to communicate to families. One of the people in our group is using ClassDojo, which automatically the parents, it's sent out in English, but then they can choose it to translate into their language. And just kind of wondering, is that enough? Is that making those families feel that you are making that effort? If then on their end they have to do the translating, should you be reaching out in their home language to make it feel more like it's coming from you? And again, we're like juggling so many things on our plate. So I think with all of this, it's just, all these little steps and pieces that are important, but sometimes remembering to do all of them can be challenging.
Thank you, Megan. All right, another group. That was, you were in breakout room three? Three, okay. How about someone from breakout room 1? I think Soha was in that group. And so some of you can tell me who was in there. Or who was the spokesperson for group 1? I hear somebody who's talking. All right, I'll come back to group 1. How about group 2? I think Leslie was in that group. Does somebody from group 2 want to talk and share what their group talked about?
I'll share for our group. We talked like in terms of, oh, there's the questions. Perfect. Okay. A lot of us, all of us were using apps as a main way, like on top of emails as well. And I feel like we found that apps were easier than email for the families. And the big thing we all felt was that making them feel like a partner this time during this year has been pretty challenging. Gladys had mentioned she did set up though like an extra tutorial support meetings to help families with the technology piece. So she was trying to bring them in that way, but it's just not the same. And the struggle of if they don't have email and they don't have a smartphone, how we could communicate with them, especially this year, not seeing them. Like normally you could hold them after and be like, oh, hey, I want to talk to you real quick. But this year's just obviously brought lots of challenges, but email and using an app was our main way of communicating and going between weekly or bi-weekly or bi-monthly, not weekly, communication, because too much could be overwhelming for them.
Thank you, Gabriella. All right, how about somebody from group 3? Oh, 3 went. I'm sorry, group 4. Group 4.
Group 4. So yeah, a lot of the things that have already been said concerning question 1. Dojo is a big app that is used, and the same thing that she just said in the other group. It just apps seem to be the way to go to communicate and for consistent communication. And also, I love hearing everybody's just everything they're sharing, because I'm writing everything down. Just I'm like had no idea about some of these other methods of communication via technology. The second question, making an effort to communicate with families in the language that they understand. Challenge, big challenge. A lot of us said, well, that's why we're here. We really need to learn that. And there was a really good point brought up by one of the teachers in our group. And she said, even just helping families teach their kids with the support work, the homework, because they don't know the sounds, just what a challenge that is. They might not even understand some of the sounds for the alphabet, and what a challenge that can be. Mm-hmm. And then for the third question about helping bilingual families partner, I know for me, I work at a lab. It's called Project Help, a lab. So the families bring their kids, so I'm able to have that personal connection with them and try to speak with them as much as I can. I can see their body language, they can see me. It's easy for me to do it in that setting, but in a regular classroom setting, not so easy. And we just talked about how just making an effort and having them see that you are making that effort and that you're trying to reach out, you're trying to find different ways to communicate, that they're going to know that or feel that you are trying to partner with them.
Thank you, Teresa. And you bring up a really good point, and I couldn't remember if it was your group or a different group that I was in, but one of the teachers said for that second one, are you making an effort to communicate to the families in the language they understand? You know, a lot of these apps and the newsletters, it kind of automatically does it, but the teacher kind of expressed a little aha. And I know who it is, but I don't know if it's okay to say who it is, because you might have more to say or don't want to talk about it. But I love that you said that and that you had that aha, that, you know, it automatically translates, it sends it out to people, but you express that you haven't thought about, well, what if I make the effort? I send the email and then they use the translating service or whatever to translate it. So it's kind of on them to translate it. But so
yeah, that's what I said. I felt like, am I really being inclusive with that? I mean, I kind of just thought, oh, I have it all covered, but it's me, you know, just pushing it out in my language and what I know, and then it's on the, you know, the onus is on them to translate it. And does that feel welcoming? I don't know, maybe not. So it's just one of those things, just like a lot of things in the last year that have happened in our world where I go, okay, you know, I try to be a worldly thinking person, but I can't help it that the environment that I grew up in is very different than what the world is. And so what I think is, I want to say normal, but what my experiences are is not what everybody else's experiences are. And to just know that is something that's important, I think. Just acknowledge that and think about, yeah, maybe not. Maybe, you know, my ideal world of how things were in the work is not, I know it's not everyone's experience, but it's something that if you're more aware of it, then it just helps you as a person. I don't know. Just a thought.
I appreciate that, Beth. I really do. You know, thinking about, well, what if I sent out an email and I translated it before I sent it out? Or even if I just looked up, you know, how to say a couple of things in their language.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so I love that you said that. I appreciate that. Thank you. Okay. Is there anyone from group 1 or I think it was group 1 and group 5 that haven't shared yet that would like to share their reflections on what you guys talked about in your group? I know we only have a few minutes left and I want to make sure that we have time for the session evaluation and a couple other things, but I want to give everybody a chance to share.
I was in group 1. I'll share for group 1. So we focus mostly on the first question about communicating with families, and the main way was using the apps, whether it's Dojo or Seesaw, and also using like a monthly newsletter to keep families the information on what concepts are being taught in the classroom, and making sure that it's translated into their the language of our students. And then the other thing that we talked about was that this year, with things being different, the members, we talked about either using Google Voice or giving out our personal cell phone numbers just for those. Like in my case, my 2 EL families have my personal cell phone number because they needed that extra one-on-one support with the technology piece being added. So that was some of the ways we communicated with our families.
Thank you, Shannon. Appreciate it. Okay, anybody else? Okay, I'm glad we have that opportunity, and I hope that we have more opportunities for that in our future webinars. I do want to share with you really quick on the Padlet, and this kind of came up in some of the conversations about maybe some resources for parents. I want to just quickly share with you the tools that are on here. We already showed you or talked about the translation interpretation resources and the engaging with families on social media, that beginner's guide. There's also something in here called the communication survey questions. I'll let you go in there and look at that at a different time, but it's just something if you wanted to use it with peers or other staff members to kind of just reflect on, you know, where you think you are as a grade level, as a school, in terms of communicating with parents. There is an article in there also, what is TransLanguaging? If you want to learn a little bit more about that, there is an excellent article in there. And one of my favorite resources is at the very bottom here. It's a parent resource on the READ website. And if you click on that, it actually takes you to the READ website, and you will see there's some videos that were created. Actually, this one Soha and I created together. And it's called Supporting Literacy Through Conversations at Home. And I won't play it, but I'll kind of just show you some samples in here where
it is raining.
we actually provide these samples to parents. So, you know, this is, as a teacher, you can use this with your parents, and it shows them how you can engage with your students in conversations. How you can have simple conversations at home. You know, if you guys are talking about a book of fiction or nonfiction, if you're playing I Spy, these are some things that you can do with your children to build those literacy skills, everyday conversation. So this video is provided for you here. It's a 13-minute video that teachers can give to their families. And it's also translated into Spanish, and the Spanish version is right below it. There are other videos on this website too. We're not going to talk about today, and some additional resources. We'll hit those during our other webinars, but I wanted to make you aware of this, supporting literacy through conversations at home, both in English and in Spanish. Soha and I have, I know we worked on those a while ago, and those have been posted on the site for you. And I think those are all the tools. Again, take a look at those social media guides and the translation interpretation resources. Our colleague Julie Webb has developed a lot of these. She's actually not with us today because she is about to have a baby. So you'll see her name a lot too, Julie Webb. She is our colleague as well. All right, so I know we are a little bit over time here, so I won't keep you guys too much longer. I just want to provide you with some extended learning opportunities. On the Padlet, we have a section for you to apply what you've learned today. So we invite you to use what you learned today to make a plan. What can you do to improve communication with bilingual families, and how will this directly connect to student learning? And you'll notice on the Padlet, there's an opportunity in the next few weeks, if you want to try out some different communication strategies or something you've learned from one of the tools, you know, you want to try out one of the tools with your families and you want to reflect on that, please do that on the Padlet so that we can kind of learn from one another. What worked for you? What didn't work for you? If you like Flipgrid, there's a Flipgrid link in there. You can go into Flipgrid and you can do a little recording of yourself and talk about what you did, what you tried, what worked, what didn't work. So it's up to you. If you want to write something, or if you prefer Flipgrid, you can do that. Or if you want to do both, you can do that as well. So looking ahead, through effective communication, mutual trust can begin, and families and educators can establish connections in order to become partners in student learning. And our focus for our next webinar is going to be really establishing those effective relationships with bilingual families. So that is going to be our next webinar, and that is on May, I'm forgetting the day exactly.
May 3rd.
Thank you. May 3rd is our next webinar. So we invite you to attend that as well. Any other questions about the webinars, or I know some of you were signed up to do the pre-surveys, and Julie actually sent those out. Thank you for those who have completed those. If you are interested in completing the pre and post surveys, you will be compensated for those. Let us know if you did not get the link to that, and we will make sure that you get it so you can complete it. Before you leave today, I'm going to go ahead and put in this link in the chat here. Actually, I already have it pulled up, but my Zoom is covering it. Here it is. If you could please, before we leave today, complete the evaluation form, the feedback form. This is really going to help us as we move forward in our future sessions to really make sure that we are providing what you need. And we'd love to hear your greatest takeaways and what it is that what suggestions you have for future webinars as well. So it's just a few questions. It won't take long. If you could please complete this for us, we would greatly appreciate it. Want to thank you for your time and your attention today. I'm sorry that we went over just a little bit, but if there's any questions that you have, please feel free to put them on the Padlet. There's a whole section for questions, or if you want to email us directly, you may do that. Or I'll stay on for a little bit if you want to stick on and ask any questions here on Zoom. Leslie, anything else? Soha?
Not from me. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thank you. We'll hope to see you next time. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
So I'm not sure if I filled out that was it the pre-survey?
Pre-survey?
I know I filled out something.
I can check for you.
Yeah, check for me if it was during like the email interest email. I know I filled out some sort of form there. So I don't know if that was it. If that was it, then I know I did that. But I've gotten so many emails because we've gone through like 27 schedule changes this year. And I tend to maybe be a little quick on my delete. I don't know what that is. It doesn't look important. And like even this one, I'm like, oh, UC Davis, because my student teacher is from UC Davis. So I usually, that caught my eye. And so I was like, oh, wait a minute. And then I went, oh, wait a minute, that's that survey thing that I said I would be part of. So that was just, like last night. I'm like, oh, thank God I read it or whenever you said it. So
yes. So Beth, I checked. So you haven't completed it. That's okay.
So can you send it again? Because it's probably in my trash. And
I'll send it again. And yeah, don't worry. And I know we try not to bombard you with too many emails. Try to do them kind of like staggered.
Right,
but,
right. I'll just keep an eye out more now. It's just I get so much junk all the time, and so
no problem.
My fault. So
no problem. I'll send it to you.
Okay, that would be awesome. Okay, and then I'll do this other communication.
Actually, here I will put it right here in the chat, and you can have it right here.
And I have it right next to all the other 37 tabs I have open.
Yeah, and I'll also email it to you if that's helpful.
Okay, cool.
There you go.
I see it right there. All right.
All right. Thank you, Beth.
So we'll see you on the 3rd then.
Yes. Thank you so much.
All right. Enjoy your evening.
You too.
Bye, you too.
Okay. Bye.
Shannon, Megan, do you guys have questions? Oh, Teresa. Oh, okay. Teresa, do you have any questions?
She might just be doing the survey.
Yeah.
I'm going to hit the stop record.
Okay.